Okay, good morning, and welcome to our second day of the symposium. This morning we have a really interesting opportunity to speak among some key industry and government leaders, as well as international leaders in this space, to sort of discuss some of the key topics and that have been posed at the conference so far, and some of the really challenging issues that face us as we continue to improve our capabilities for the warfighter. So I'm gonna the way we're gonna handle this morning's panel or session is it's a roundtable type discussion. There won't be any slides. I'm going to make some comments and introduce our panel members who've graciously given their time this morning to join us. And then we're going to go into some question and answer and maybe free flow a little bit, based upon how the discussion's going and some of the other things that we've heard throughout the conference, which have been interesting. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start off with some initial comments and then introduce our panel members, and we'll dive right into it. By the way, for a little administrative sort of flow here, there's if you pose a question, there's over 300, and I suspect that number will increase. First off, I encourage everybody to ask questions because once we get going, I'm going to start pulling from that. But if try and keep it concise. Don't need a long explanation of the, because then it's easier for us to pull the question out and get to your question. But if it's a long read, it's going to be much more difficult for us to do that. So try and get right to the question, and then we'll be able to jump in there. So with that, let's get started. So good morning, distinguished guests, senior defense leaders, industry executives, researchers, and of course, I know we have some warrior scholars out there from the Naval Postgraduate School. So that's good that you're in attendance. Thank you for joining us at the Naval Postgraduate School's 23rd Annual Acquisition Research Symposium and Innovation Summit. Our theme this year is about accelerating warfighter capabilities, and given the world dynamics, it couldn't be a more important and urgent theme for us to be discussing. We stand at this pivotal moment with the Department of War in lockstep with broader efforts has redesignated the Defense Acquisition System as the Warfighting Acquisition System. We've stood up portfolio acquisition executives to align authority and responsibility, streamline requirements processes, expanded commercial pathways and other transaction authorities, and place the entire enterprise on a war footing. The goal is clear: deliver relevant capability to the warfighter at speed and at scale early and often to deter and defeat our near-peer adversaries. And if you heard Mr. Duffy's comments earlier today, he emphasized the need for this transformation and for speed, which we're going to spend a little time talking about speed during this panel session. Transforming policy on paper into performance in the fleet and into the field is never simple, however. Persistent challenges remain: bridging the valley of death, rebuilding resilient defense industrial base capable of surge and high attrition conflict, shifting from a culture of compliance to one of collaborative risk-taking, integrating rapid AI and software-defined capabilities, balancing speed with accountability, and forging deeper partnerships with industry and allies while protecting our advantages is key. Today's plenary session, Forging the Shield, Collaborative Development for Immediate Warfighter Advantage, is designed to confront, to analyze the realities of the problem head on. We'll have a frank and open discussion about these issues, and we'll explore several, I say 10 here on my paper, but we're going to explore several key areas on how do we go about doing that. And I like to try and get from the strategic into application, because often we talk strategically about what we should do, and then we're left to figure out, well, what are we going to do tomorrow to make that actually happen? So we would like to dig into that. We'll examine whether or not current reforms are really collapsing the valley of death, or if requirements, rigidity, industrial-based constraints still favor multi-year perfection over months to field solution. We'll probe the greatest remaining barriers to collaboration, things like intellectual property, funding predictability, and demand signals. That all of these things have to come together in order for us to be successful, and assess how small and non-traditional firms can move from innovation to becoming part of the core supply chain and distribution. We'll discuss adapting requirements and some of the international challenges, and it's our great pleasure to have a senior leader from the international side to give us your perspective on not only how you think we're doing, but also how you're doing it in your country. Okay, this is, like I said, this is not going to be an abstract discussion. We bring senior leaders together to have frank and honest discussions on how we actually go about the business of acquisition in warfare. Okay, with that, I'd like to make some introductions. So I'd first like to introduce Mr. Chris Mang. And Chris, what I've asked is, I'm going to do a very quick, not a good introduction, but I'm going to do an introduction, and I'd like you to, when I finish my part, just give maybe 30 seconds, a little bit more on what you're actually doing and how that applies, and the importance of your position. So let me just get you started here. So Chris is the Vice President of Strategy Business Development for Lockheed Martin's Rotary Mission Systems business area. It's a $17.2 billion enterprise that employs approximately 35,000 people and manages more than 1,000 programs. He's responsible for leading RMS's global strategy and business development activities, delivering innovative, competitive, and reliable solutions that enable Lockheed Martin's customers to create a more secure and prosperous world. Chris also oversees strategic planning, investment, acquisitions, new business concepts for each of the 4 lines of business that comprise the RMS portfolio. So quite a depth there. So if you just give us, and I'm going to do this for each of you, just another 30 seconds on some of your key things that you're working on.
No, thank you. And maybe a little extra background there. I just joined Rotary Mission Systems from Missiles and Fire Control, our missile business, where I spent 15 years. And I was in the same role there for 5, the strategy and business development lead. Primarily what I do is I'm the forward-looking guy saying, okay, what's the business going to look like in 10 years? What threats do we have to deal with? Partnering with institutions to really shape our strategic investments into, what's next, how do you solve problems? And for certain, in the last 5 years, we have been saying what's increasingly important is how you do it, not what you do. So design for producibility, streamline supply chain, having factories that are ready to put things together when needed. But yeah, my job is primarily to really be like almost the chief operating officer for the business. Where are you going? How are you facilitizing it all? So
great. Thanks, Chris, and welcome. Your insight on the large business side is going to be very insightful. Next, I'd like to introduce Rear Admiral Mattis. Admiral Mattis hails from Fullerton, California, graduated with distinction from the United States Military Academy, beat Navy. And in 1994, not that old, he attended Oxford University in England, and in 1996 was a Fitzgerald Scholar. At sea, Admiral Mattis qualified in submarines as a nuclear engineer and as a ballistic missile officer while serving on the USS Henry M. Jackson. He served on the staff of the CNO in Washington, D.C. as the assistant for political and military affairs. So, Admiral Mattis, if you could, I know you have a very critical position in NOPACOM now. If you could just give a little bit more background on what that is.
Yeah, I think actually, so thanks for the introduction. The real reason I'm here probably was the acquisition work I did in support of my last command, actually in Europe, supporting Ukraine with security assistance in the Black Sea between 2023 and 2025, working closely with Secretary of the Navy's office as well as OPNAV, multiple acquisition agencies in trying to accelerate war materials, armaments, and capabilities to Ukraine for their very effective campaign in the Black Sea. So in that role, I worked very closely with the acquisition folks. In this role, I'm currently the Director of Fleet Industrial Integration and Innovation at PacFleet, which is a big title to say that I drive advanced manufacturing capabilities into the Indo-PACOM AOR in support of Admiral Paparo and Admiral Kaler. And the goal there is to be able to accelerate repair part generation as well as drone manufacture at the edge.
Great, excellent. And welcome to the panel. So now, Colonel, soon to be Brigadier General Ariel Dvorjetski. General Select Dvorjetski is the Program Executive Officer for Weapons and Commander of the Armament and Electronics Warfare Department, Israeli Air Force Material Directorate. He's responsible for planning and execution of all life cycle activities for air-delivered munitions for the Israeli Air Force weapons portfolio. He also provides strategic and technical guidance to the workforce for military, civilian, and contractor personnel, leading discovery, development, and integration of all warfighting weapon technologies for the Israeli Air Force. So welcome to the panel, Ariel. If you could give us a little bit more background, perhaps even what your next opportunity is going to be.
Yes, thank you so much. So I'm Ariel, and as I serve as the PO in the Israeli Air Force. And really, I'm responsible for the capability development and integration in a highly dynamic operational environment. So my work sits in the really interaction and intersection of operational urgency, technology integration, and international cooperation and defense acquisition. So actually, from my perspective, acquisition today is not really a business or compliance process. It's really directly connected to operational relevance and deterrence in our region. So we often need to adapt capabilities under real-world time pressure while working closely with the industry, with the US partner, and then eventually with the foreign military sales frameworks. And this is why I really believe that in the current capacity as a PO, we see kind of really practical perspective on such topics that are really relevant for the conference, as a rapid fielding, modular open system architecture implementation, allied interoperability, digital integration, and all these challenges really balancing the speed, the security, and the flexibility in the modern defense acquisition systems. And now I do it for weapons. I'm going to do it for all the portfolio for whether it's platforms, all the material here in the Material Command, the Israeli Air Force soon. Over.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Ariel. As we go through the panel, I think we'll be very interested in your perspectives as you observe how we're evolving, how we're changing our footing and our orientation, our own acquisition processes. What do you see inside of your inside the IDF and the mission pressures that you see, how we can adapt, or are we going in a direction that you think might be effective or not? So I think you'll bring some great insights to this discussion. So and finally, Kyle Tucker Davis. Kyle is currently the Director of Data Engine for Scale AI Public Sector, focused on the development of reliable AI systems for both computer vision and Gen AI applications. Prior to his current role, Kyle spent multiple years driving the creation of AI training data for national security applications. Before Scale AI, Kyle was an infantry officer in the United States Marine Corps, where he served in various operational and instructor roles. So Kyle, if you could give us 30 seconds more on what you're doing, it will. I think yours can't hear you there, Kyle.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Awesome. academic background is mathematics, AI, and military studies. In the current role, again, the theme here is reliable AI systems. So the perspective I'll try to provide today is what must be true for us to actually field reliable artificial intelligence that can actually move the needle on national security use cases and increase lethality. And I think there's 4 themes that I will likely unpack throughout the discussion today. The first is that data is fuel for these AI systems. The second is that engines are more important than models and iteration is more important than deployment. And the third, which is really a multi-part, is that reliability is king. And defining reliability when it comes to artificial intelligence is quite challenging. Happy to be here.
Great, thanks, and thanks again to the whole panel. So let's go ahead and jump into it. I said I had a few major themes that I wanted to go over. Let's start with this Valley of Death discussion. Chris, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ask one of you, and then we'll all sort of jump in there. So feel free to comment, but we'll start off with Chris, and then I'll open it up to the panel. So the first question or topic I like to talk about is about in the Valley of Death. It's the Warfighter Acquisition System and Portfolio Acquisition Executives, which we're developing now. And each of the services is looking at how best to implement that for their service. They were created to collapse this Valley of Death concept. And for those of you not familiar with that term, it's the idea from taking something from the development process in the acquisition system and getting it transitioned and adopted into the force. So the idea is this transition across this Valley of Death by prioritizing rapid fielding of good enough commercial solutions. In practice, my question here is, are these reforms enabling the Department of War to deliver warfighting capabilities in months rather than years? So do you see from your vantage point that what we're doing effectively is going to facilitate that? And if not, why? For example, persistent requirements? So Mr. Duffy this morning talked about we need to shift from writing requirements to identifying real needs and iterating those things. And are we positioned to be able to do that? Does the color of money, for example, the budgeting process, are we going to be able to shift that? And if not, what do we need to do? And the defense industrial base surge limitations still favor lengthy programs. Is that still true or not? So with that said, Chris, could you comment on, from your perspective at the senior level in the industry, how you see these reforms facilitating, or is it just, I don't want to say just, but is it something that needs more depth and understanding or authorities to be able to execute?
No, thank you. I hate to say this, but to some degree, it depends, right? It depends what you're trying to achieve. I think there are certain mission areas, like a space-based interceptor or a THAAD missile, that you go probably not real close to commercial technology, and you're going to have a difficulty finding companies that are going to really be able to do some of those things rapidly. And we spent 10 years trying to get that to work. So bottom line is, I think in technologies that are closer to commercial, so think software, think AI, think software-defined radios, I think you will see that ability. And I do think the process is helping. I think over time, we need to give these opportunities, this new paradigm, a chance. The pendulum swung way too far out to one side. This is pulling that pendulum back towards the middle, where there is more agility, and let's face it, industry and government got to where we are together. Government signaling a big change. We're going to maneuver with that change. And in a lot of cases, that'll help big companies like Lockheed as well, that have, worked through the Valley of Death before. And it just does add time, which equals money and resources. So what do we need to do? I think they've had a good start. I think, the frozen middle still is there on both sides, and it'll take some time to thaw that out and get the new processes going. So, industry follows, and we're trying to follow the best we can, and it'll just take some time, and I think we need to stick with it, and we'll see what we can achieve. I'm not sure I have any silver bullets for you right now as to what I would tell you to go do differently.
Okay. Let me,
Ray, can I build on that?
absolutely. Just go ahead.
I'd offer, so I was on CNO Cottle's transition team, working innovation adoption with Vice Admiral O'Connor, O'Connor. So Admiral O'Connor and I are classmates from the Naval Academy, known her for a very long time. We've been running around in space circles inside the Navy with respect to space expertise and space acquisition. And so again, I've got a long background on trying to work these acquisition problem sets. And what we were really trying to do during CNO Cottle's transition was figure out how we were going to re-baseline the Navy's approach to acquisition to be more innovative. The reason I was on that panel was because I was struggling to help the Navy and help Ukraine rapidly adapt to what was happening in the Black Sea across a multitude of organizations in the Secretary of the Navy's office, as well as in OPNAV. And the reality is what Admiral O'Connor was trying to do is the ASN RDNA senior military assistant or deputy is really change the organization pretty holistically to be able to pivot to go faster and to rearrange the prioritization and approach from going from programs to portfolios where we can really compete capabilities. I see the key challenge there, though, with the standing up of the PAEs as the fact that the mindset and the culture and the personnel to some degree haven't fully shifted, or maybe haven't shifted at all at this point. And so to some degree, we have new processes. We've thrown out a lot of the, JSID's processes all out the window. And we're inventing how these new processes are supposed to go faster. But the people who are actually executing inside the acquisition world are frankly the same people that have just been reorganized, learning new processes and trying to go faster. But there's still lots of questions about, how do the authorities flow down? What do they look like? And we still have the same frozen middle. A great comment by Chris there on both sides, particularly around contracting officers and the ability to take risk and to figure out how to partner appropriately with industry. And so we have to work through those problems to be relevant. But the reality is we don't have a lot of data on what that looks like yet. And there's going to be a lot of learning on both sides. So I don't see a lot of change immediately. I see that if we can evolve these processes, train our people, and have some quick wins, that we may be able to, create some examples that we need to have folks follow through. But right now, I'd say we're looking at, we've thrown a lot of the old out. We're building some of the new. Most of the people are the same, and the culture hasn't really changed in spite of senior leadership direction that it needs to change now. Thanks.
Yeah, this topic came up earlier today with Mr. Duffy, and I'm going to come around. Ariel, I want to come back. I'm going to come to you in just a second in terms of as you see what we're trying to achieve with the transformation and this culture. How do you see, what are the things that you would do, and what are you doing within the Israeli Defense Force? But when we talk about this frozen middle, I'm just going to keep going to, okay, what do I do tomorrow? So if I'm a commander out there, or if I'm a PM or a PAE, and I'm just thinking out loud now, what are those tasks? Because we all would agree that, we're going to have to make this transformation. The culture was one of the top two things that Mr. Duffy put out. Like, how do we get the cultural change to permeate throughout the institution in a speed so that we don't get overcome by time? So we have to create some actionable things. And as you all, as part of the leaders of industry and Department of War, given that clean slate, what would we, and I know I got that, it's a sort of open-ended question, what would we do tomorrow? But I think it's time that we really have to decompose that. We have with the reduction in the workforce, who's left, how do we realign, what do we got, incentives, etc. So, Ariel, do you see any within your challenge? Because you're in the middle of, you're closest to the fight right now. How do you see this affecting your workforce, and what lessons can we learn from how the IDF is doing it with the similar challenges?
Yes, thanks, Ray. I think in my perspective, the theme that you said about the values of this is really, I don't see it as a transition problem. It's a structural misalignment between the innovation, speed, and fielding of the systems. So I think eventually we're very good to the generating prototypes quickly.
I think we lost Ariel there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yep, we got you.
Yeah.
Could you start? Could
Yeah.
you start
Yeah,
over?
so yes. Yeah, sorry, it's my my bad connection. So I think that it's not only here a transition problem, it's really a structural misalignment between the innovation speed and the fielding of the systems. And I said, because we are very good at generating prototypes quickly, sometimes within months, but the system takes the capability from prototype to the operational deployment still built for stability and not urgency. And in our operational reality, this gap is really critical, and the capability that is not fielded quickly and it's just delayed, it becomes irrelevant because it's kind of the threat already evolved. So I think what we tried to do in the last 2 years is really in certain areas, not all of them, really to make the consciousness shift that we are willing in certain areas to field the good enough systems. And it might be a slogan, but it's kind of systems that we understand. It may be not 100% correct. There are maybe some glitches. There may be some areas that we kind of understand the scope of what needs to be improved, but we improve them iteratively at the battlefield and in an operational use. And I think with that, and that's really refer to what you said in regards to culture, in some ways, it's like to think from the other side, especially when you want to solve strategic problems. You want to understand and to think from the other side, because in our adversary's world, sometimes the fact that we have here maybe barrage of rockets, maybe not all of them are very precise, but some of them could be good enough. So if you walk in the same area, you can maybe fight the enemy in a different perspective. And I think that here the key lesson is speed is not only an efficiency issue, it's really directly impacts deterrence, because if your adversary sees that you can adapt and deploy quickly, it changes his calculus. So it means, in our perspective, on one hand, you want to be in a good enough systems, but on the other hand, you want always to outpace the adversary in this learning curve. So still, you want to have those capabilities that you have that qualitative edge from a military perspective, from the technology. So you need to outpace the enemy, but you need to be in a situation you understand that you might employ not very mature systems, but if you adapt it quickly and put it in the battlefield, you leverage the current situation. And I think this is something in the culture that we weren't in the past in those areas of the good enough, but it's a balance. It doesn't mean that you all go to the good enough, but you have to balance it. And with this balance, you can make your acquisition much better. Over.
Yeah, I think that you sort of bring up in the balance discussion, this topic of how much needs to go fast and how much you need to maintain a steady state. So we hear a lot about speed. Obviously, we need to get capability to the fight at the right time. Could we inadvertently, however, on some systems be moving fast and get it out there fast, but it'd be the wrong answer because it's not integrated. So one of the challenges that in our process, and we look at this total system integration, .mil PF. When we design a system, is it aligned to doctrine, organization, training, material leadership, etc. And that slows down or is perceived to slow down our process versus perhaps industry designs a system, it meets a specific requirement, but perhaps is less concerned about the total system integration across the entire force. So as we go as fast and with speed, do we run the risk of deploying systems that may be good for the moment, but cause other second, third order impacts across the force in terms of resources or training misalignment? Even though we solved an immediate problem, we perhaps created another problem that impacts budgets and processes down the road. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, this isn't an either or, this is a both and. I know in the process that we architected for the Navy, the intent was to figure out how we could rapidly field new capabilities without having to worry about the entire DOTML PFP, chain that is slows down what inevitably becomes big R requirements. What we want to be able to do is go with little R requirements. We want to be able to buy from industry, immediately, and then iterate with industry, especially around evolving capabilities. This is particularly true of things like drones and other capabilities that need to be fielded immediately, and then iterate in order to enable. And so I do think that that the ability to do that to some degree, validate that those things are work, and then create an on-ramp to allow a full DOTML PFP development of how you bring that into a program of record, fully integrate that. But you cannot slow down the integration of new technologies and new capabilities to the warfighter by demanding a full plan on .PMLP at the front end of these programs. It's just not it's not cost effective, and it makes no sense given that we haven't proven some of these technologies out yet. So there's really, sort of three paths that we came up with in the Navy arena. One was to essentially go to a full MLPFP approach, obviously for programs of records, majors, platforms, and other things. Those are going to require that. Training sustainment's absolutely there. That's on one extreme. The other extreme is the emergent need that we need to rapidly field. That goes almost without any .MLPFP capability. And then in the middle, it's, once we've proven out the rapid capability, how do I transition that to partial or full, programmatic status so I can get it fully integrated and trained? And there may be shortcuts to enable us to do that. So I don't think this is an either or, this is really a both and.
Okay. From industry's perspective, Chris, do you have any thoughts on that in terms of, do you see that while we say that in the contracting process or the requirements that flow to you, do you see the this total system integration being an inhibitor to speed, or your ability to focus on the needs? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, there are cases like aircraft integration of, low-cost cruise missiles. The Air Force looks like they're going to buy 3 or 4 different variants. Integration on an airplane's $200 million in a couple of years. You're short of test aircraft, you're short of labs. You start to see this bottleneck of, you don't really understand quite how they're going to get through it. But in the case of things like drones, you could have, to some degree, generic training .mil-PF, where you're going to say, hey, you're going to get iterative to be better or less or cheaper drones. You're going to have a common control station. So I think there's ways around this with a little bit of thoughtfulness. But I think Ariel brought up something that was very important. And one of the things to learn, I think, from the Israeli experience is they live in a very dangerous neighborhood, which evolves very quickly. And so you see them being very agile. And if you look at something like Iron Dome, their missiles were very cheap. When we brought them to the United States, they doubled in price because we changed the design because we wanted, 15-year shelf life, and I think in their neighborhood, they don't keep them that long, right? They build them and they use them pretty quickly. So somehow we've got to normalize where we fit there of, when the threat evolves very quickly and you're evolving with it, there are certain things you're going to leave behind, but by definition, that should make it, cheaper and faster to build, right? So if it's something like an F-35 you think you're going to keep for 30 years, you got to put the time in up front. If it's something like an MRAP that you're going to build and send to theater and use or lose. Maybe you don't, right? And I think the Admiral said, it's a balance. And I know everybody hates that word. Just like you when you say it depends. But it's a balance. Some things you're going to go very quickly, realizing that there's almost no tail because you're going to use them all. Right. So don't worry about the logistics tail. You're going to build them and send them. And if it doesn't work, you're going to scavenge parts from another one, or you're going to throw it away. So I think it's got to be balanced.
Yeah, it sounds like we say balance when you drive that down to the program manager. There was a question. I'm going to paraphrase the question in the comments here that sort of talked about what authorities are the program managers going to have. And it sounds like as we're going through the balancing and the cultural shift, some of the ability for the program manager to make those calls, like we're going to design a system and we're not going to necessarily be totally .mil PF aligned. We're going to feel it out and, as you say, maybe fail, but those authorities need to be driven down to lower levels. So I think, as Admiral Mattis, as you said, this is not an either or, and the empowerment needs to be driven down to the levels of to the folks in the foxhole, which are the program offices and the contractors that are actually building the material. I want to shift a little bit to Kyle. This is sort of, I'd like you to sort of take the lead on this one. It's really about the I'll just read my question here. Forging the shield in high attrition conflict demands resilient global industrial base. How effective are our processes, or how effective will they be relating to these reforms and small and non-traditional firms? Are we creating an environment that makes it easier for small non-traditionals to get engaged from your perspective? And if not, why not? What would you do perhaps to open up that opportunity space? And what's mitigating our ability to do that and get things into the defense industrial base? And Ariel, I'd like your thoughts on that also, because I know I think Israel is, if not the most innovative country in the world in terms of technology, it is certainly up there. What do you do to encourage small businesses or startups to get engaged? And one of the things again that was brought up this morning is how do we create conditions that allow for this to occur? Speed up the processes. So if a small company, for example, needs to get a site clearance, it shouldn't take a year or 2 years to go through a process. How do we speed that environment up? So, Kyle, what are your thoughts on that? Is how do we improve that to really leverage these great minds at the small and medium? And I would also argue, perhaps, how do they get investment to do that? Because a lot of these small companies don't really have margins to be able to spend a year trying to get engaged with the Department of War, because they have about a month or two worth of working capital. They're focused on the technology for which they're known for. Over.
Yeah, it's a great series of questions, and I'll try this back to some of the speed comments from earlier. The OTA pathways in similar vehicles have made it easier. It also remains incredibly challenging, capital intensive and time intensive to do work with the government. When we think about the artificial intelligence systems that are being built, we are talking about bringing state-of-the-art technology to support government applications. Generally, there's a lag in adoption. What is happening at the bleeding edge of academia versus what the industry adopts, and right now, or what the government adopts, and right now, there's actually near parity as we try to get these. So I think the challenge is, as we think about these AI systems that we're building, and that could be a computer vision model that is going on a drone. It could be agentic planning or indications and warnings, or even all the back office support use cases, some of which were mentioned in the Q&A. These are not pieces of deterministic software. These are often systems that are approaching problems where there's not a capital T true answer. They're living systems that need iteration. So to go back to high school algebra, y equals mx plus b, and we think about speed to prototype, many of the proposals and solicitations that are out there have timelines in days, not months, which is excellent. So the signal is there, the is there, and the ability to get to quickly is there, but fundamentally to make the leap, a small company that is working with the government needs to have some certainty that there's going to be some consistent funding, and often that funding needs to apply not just to the widget or the user experience that is being presented, but often to the infrastructure and the maintenance and the support that goes along with it and is necessary for the maturation of something that can get into production. And the last thing I'll offer on the comment is I think speed is critical. This is M and Y equals MX plus B. Speed without a dashboard equals unintended consequence. Or another way to put that is speed without evaluation could be dangerous. So as we continue to bring state-of-the-art software to bear, the next phase of this AI cycle is not going to be trying to apply AI everything. It's going to be asking the question, is this any good? Why is this system better than that system? And am I sure I can trust it?
Okay, I'm not sure if.
Yeah, right.
Okay, good. I wasn't sure if Kyle was locked up or not. Go ahead, Ariel.
Yeah, I wanted to add on that in regards to the workforce in that area. And I believe really culture is really the most difficult challenge, more than even a policy or regulation, because in the operational units, decision-making in fast, decentralized and driven by the mission urgency, but in acquisition system, usually the decision-making is often very centralized and it's process-driven and it's usually risk-averse. So it really creates that disconnect between those who define the needs and those who deliver the capability. And what we try to bridge this by bringing acquisition closer to the operations. So in our arena, we are much smaller, as you know, so it could be a little bit easier than in the USA, but really in areas where you can, especially in urgent timeframes, to embed the engineers with the operational units, it could shorten you the feedback loops and increasing the direct interaction within the industry. So in that area, I think if you take like talent exchange programs, which are important, they are not sufficient. So we try in certain areas, try to take those talent exchange program, but rebuild it in a certain way that you can work shoulder to shoulder with industry, with embedded personnel. And in this way, it helps you really to do it much faster. It really helps you on the other hand to maybe in certain areas really to embedded them in an area where it's kind of could be like even a software driven areas, but it helps you really to push the decision authority downward and create an environment where taking calculated risk is acceptable. And I think one of the key items that we use is really we try to push the decision authority downward. And it means that in certain areas, you're willing to accept the risk, but it means that your personnel understand they have much more responsibility. And so in that regards, we try to accommodate that responsibility with the authority. And I think that if you combine it together, it really helps you to kind of close the gap and build that bridge. So this is one of the key elements where if you are smaller, you can be a little bit more agile, but you can take this framework and use it even in bigger militaries. So this is one of the key elements that I believe we can do it in the area that you asked earlier.
Yeah, one of the, if I could just pull on that a little bit, Ariel, again, some of the challenges that are out there for these small companies is, again, it's capital. So I want to come back to the talent exchange for a moment, particularly Chris with from a large industry perspective. But if a small company would love to go out and engage and be part of embedded or participate with the operational users, but the problem is they have they're capital intensive. They need to focus on workforce, technology. So how do we get past that? Is it something that perhaps the government has funds this? Is it come from venture capitalists? Is there some sort of a partnership with larger companies? How do we get to that point? Because I agree. I think this idea that if you embed engineers, you embed companies, which is going to bring up another issue in a moment in terms of data sharing. But how do you see that challenge of getting companies positioned where they can actually do that? Because that requires resources on their part as well. Anybody? I open to anybody if you want to.
Yeah, one of the challenges we have seen with other than well-funded new entrants is they tend to have a good technology, but they have trouble scaling, right? And now software different, right? But the minute you get into hardware and some of the big stuff, it is, and you do see smaller companies struggle with that. I have always told when I talk with the government that, you know, Lockheed Martin is transitioning to be a model-based systems engineering company. We're going to spend $5 billion or $6 billion doing that. And it's in process now, but it's the suppliers and the smaller companies that are going to need government support, either through, you know, low cost, you know, loans or direct government support. That's where you want to put those resources to help them. Embedding people is an interesting thing. That's good. And it can serve the purpose of iterating quickly. You just have to make sure that, you know, you got to remember the operators are talking directly to the coders, and you got to make sure you know where it's going. Sometimes you see them go do things that aren't as really operationally relevant. But it is a good place to build relationships and understand the problem for sure. So again, it's a balance of how much you're doing in the field versus how much are you pushing back to the machine to have it, you know, make sure it all comes together and works and integrates right. And AI will change a lot of that, I freely admit. So over to somebody else.
Yeah, I would offer that it's a sporty environment out there now, but you don't need to create a welfare system for small businesses. You know, small businesses fail all the time. It's an unfortunate reality. It's also how our capitalist system works. So the reality is there are folks who will figure it out and there are folks who won't figure it out. The question is how rapidly you can feel the system, how well aligned you are to your customer and the warfighting edge that it's going to provide. And if it's good enough, you know, and you're smart enough, you'll figure out how to do the scale piece or get help or get bought. There's lots of ways that those problems get solved naturally. And so I don't think we need to do anything unholy to kind of, you know, break that up. And quite frankly, there's more venture capital in defense acquisition right now than there's ever been. There's more startups and participants. This is a robust market, particularly in the software space. I'm very tired of government contracting people talking about there being some sort of vendor lock on anything right now. I'd offer my Lockheed colleague there doesn't believe vendor lock is a thing right now, with as many competitive startups as are in there trying to eat Lockheed's lunch on different pieces of the puzzle. And so I'm excited about where we're at right now. We have an incredibly robust defense industrial base that is coming back, that is AI enabled, that is venture capital backed, that can move very quickly. And so I would just offer to our contracting officers and the PAEs that they do need to take more risk. They need to get over their vendor lock concerns of the past. The reality is we have a more vibrant and robust environment to allow competition amongst these small businesses to offer new and innovative solutions. And when we find winners, we actually need to double down and fund those winners. And that's where we struggle in this, in the Valley of Death, is the government dithers around actually, you know, funding the winner of the program or transitioning from the OTA into production. And so we end up teasing these small businesses by not allowing them to actually scale, because right when they've proven out their technology, we starve them for the cash because there's some policy or risk aversion at the PAE or contracting officer level that prevents us from where we need to go. As a warfighter, as a recipient of this technology, I need it now, and I need our acquisition system to be responsive. That's what Secretary of War is asking for. That's why we're making these reforms happen. So frankly, the frozen middle has got to get fix itself, or this will continue to suffer, and we will put these small businesses that have done all this great work and have been innovative out of business because the government can't make up its mind and pick some winners.
Ray,
Yeah,
I would
on the
like just to
capital
chime
side.
in on that.
Yeah.
With
Hey,
like,
let me, Ariel, let me let Kyle go, and then I'll come back to you.
sure.
As a small business, I mean, capital and runway matters. Capital is going to come from a finite number of places. You can get bought, or you can merge. The M&A market has changed, but a partner gov funded. So there's a series of risks decisions for a truly small company that is working with the government, especially if they have a bank account that is trending towards zero. I think the one reframe I would offer here is scale is an interesting place because we have a commercial business. So we're able to choose operations in those two markets, and the deal cycles with the government are longer. And there is much more of a gray box associated with those. When we do a pilot on a nascent effort with a foundation AI model provider and we do good work, it's like, okay, here is the check, here is what is next, it is coming tomorrow, let's go, move faster. And often the challenge we've seen on some of the small programs is you do the work, you get to escape velocity, you get to the quote win, and then there's a stall as we get through the next deal cycle. And stall equals time, time equals money. If money is finite, that challenge is real. So to Ariel's point about pushing decision-making authority down and empowering those deal cycles to move faster, that will continue to catalyze the small business ecosystem in working with the government.
And I think that goes back to the.
Go ahead, Chris. Well,
I think that goes back to Admiral Mattis's point that you got to make a decision and keep moving. And this is where the contracting vehicles and the money flow stalls. But I think what he also said was correct is when you're really the winner. And I think a lot of times people think they are the winner and it's just not that apparent, right? That you are. And that's where the big companies have an advantage, that you have the depth of bench to move people off of programs to go do other things while you wait for the award. I mean, we waited more than a year before to figure out if you won or not. So, and that's one of the classic ways to have a red program, right? You disestablish the team. You don't know if you've won, you've moved on. And then you get a call that says you won and you have to put the team back together. So that's a classic acquisition challenge of just making the decision and moving on. So, right. Ariel, I don't know if you had any comments.
Yes, just a kind of a small comment on that. I think in regards to those startup companies, one of the major barriers we found out entering the defense ecosystem is the fear of those small companies to losing their control over their intellectual properties. So many startups are willing to innovate rapidly, but are not really built to survive that long acquisition cycles and board disclosure requirements. Sometimes it's difficult for them. In recent years, in our Defense Directorate for Research and Development, MAFAD, they recognized this challenge and made significant efforts to create frameworks that allow really those startups to participate without forcing them to give up all their competitive advantage. And the idea was not really to weaken IP protection, but really to create trusted mechanism when the government gains operational access, while the company still preserves ownership of its own core innovation. And I think this really helped us to kind of push forward those startups into the defense tech area. And I think that was really a game changer here in recent years. Over.
Good. Hey, I want to, Ariel, I want to stick with you for a second on some of the, so you're going down the path of intellectual property. What about some of the restrictions? If we're going to work together, not just as a joint U.S. force, but also across with our industry, with our partners in other countries, what do you see as some of those restrictions? I mean, what from our ability to work with Israel, for example, in terms of technology operation, what are some of the major restrictions, and what would you recommend to streamline that to allow not only transfer of capability but also working together?
Yes, it's a great question. It's really a tough one, but I think one of the really enablers that I believe in is the modular open system architecture. I really think that in this area, it's a key element when you want partners and allied partners to work together. And this is really important in the context of foreign customers under the foreign military sales. And a lot, actually, in a lot of conferences, we speak a lot of the MOSA, the modular system architecture, but in practice, the policy and the disclosure limit and the export controls really frameworks under those still prevent us really from leveraging it. And in my perspective, the key constraint is really not the technology, is the inability to share interfaces, standards, in the integration authority in a way that it allows partners really to actually plug into the system. And this is an area that I think that if we together define something that we really take the slogan, but really understand what we can do with that, whether it's the interfaces, whether in the production, in other areas, it really can help us to create a controlled and trusted framework. And this will allow allied partners not only to buy system, but really to adapt, to integrate, and also from the US side to leverage from it and to some their operational needs. So I think it's not only from engineering flexibility, it's really to building a truly interoperability and resilient allied force, where the capability development really is shared, it's faster, it's much more relevant to the real world. Over.
Great. So anybody else? I know Abramatch, you've got quite a bit of experience in working across internationally. What are your thoughts on the restrictions, or have you seen any challenges there? Something that we could perhaps open up and speed that relationship.
Yeah, it's both in Europe, where we have an incredible alliance partnerships, and in the Indo-Pacific, where I'm currently working. The challenges are significant and real. Policy stands between us and getting the right equipment and capabilities and the right interactions with our allies and partners across the globe. There's a couple issues there. One of them is that in the Cold War era, we had a dominance in the technology space that we no longer have right now. And so, quite honestly, countries like Japan and Korea in the advanced manufacturing space that I'm currently working, they have some of the best kit out there. We want to be partnering with them. Why am I worried about ITAR with them when, frankly, we need to be partnering together on these things? And so we need better policy descriptions around where ITAR is applicable and where it is not. Unfortunately, in this in our nation, the submarine industrial base, then the maritime industrial base, and now again the submarine industrial base has driven an enormous amount of focus on ITAR because submarines are on a controlled munitions list and warrant ITAR, and so therefore things that produce submarines sort of inherit that ITAR that problem. But our ability to share and partner is just limited by that Cold War mindset and approach. And even programs like AUKUS have moved far too slow and have been very, very difficult to actually drive the integration that we needed. We did this very successfully in support of Ukraine under UK leadership and Norwegian leadership in the Maritime Capability Coalition in support of Ukraine. And that was frankly because we let our allies lead and then we plugged in where we could. And so there are opportunities for our high-end allies to get after that, and frankly, for us to then plug into their environment rather than from them to try to plug into ours. That doesn't work for every capability, but certainly in the maritime drone space where I was operating, it made a lot of sense. And frankly, the smaller the nation, like Norway, the better things went. They brought industry partners directly in and were able to iterate faster than the UK and significantly faster than we were able to. So I'm encouraged by what our allies and partners are doing. We have to figure out how we're going to reinvigorate those relationships. And in this post-Cold War global competition, whatever you want to call the era we're in again, the great power competition or whatever, it's just a challenge across the board.
Right. What my experience is, sometimes when smaller nations or nations with less funding tend to be a little bit more innovative, sometimes the way they go about solving the problems. Hey, this is more for Chris and Kyle. I want to sort of a little spin on this line of discussion from a statutory perspective. Do you see any? It's almost an open-ended or an obvious question, right? What statutes are in the way of preventing you from accelerating or your developmental efforts and perhaps reducing costs, getting things faster, more efficiently. Are there any particular statutes or processes that you see we could go after to help open up some of these pipelines?
Do you want me to start? I can do that.
Yep.
First of all, I would agree with Admiral Mattis' comment about ITAR. And you know, certainly there is a challenge internationally. You know, as their defense budgets increase, they want to do the work in their countries. There's a concern that will pull U.S. jobs out of, you know, Alabama and other places overseas. Something we have to work through with our politician partners. But I do believe that we still think we have a dominance over all the technology pieces. And the reality is there's a lot of cases where it isn't true anymore. And I think it would be helpful. The other place, I think the FMS process is very slow, and countries are very aggravated with us. And in general, a lot of the munitions they really want that are in high demand and other systems are the same ones we want and are in high demand. So challenge is getting them to them in a reasonable time frame. I think those are two big detriments. So one, we got to keep pushing up the speed of the industrial base to support our partners and allies. We got to lean out the FMS process and get to it quicker. And I know it's a congressional thing, but the ITAR rules, we probably need to go scrub back through that and realize that in some places we're just not that special anymore, right? Certain places got it. Yep, there are certain technologies that are really tightly held, but then a lot of these you go, look, they can make their own. We're just creating havoc here. So,
Right.
Anyways,
What about things like Buy America? Is that? Do you see a need for relief in statutes that prohibit you from using overseas sources? Anybody can jump in on that question.
Yeah,
but
I'd offer it's really simple. What are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to protect American technology? Are we trying to protect American industry? Or are we trying to build capability and buy capability quickly and effectively? And the answer is it's a different solution set based on what you're actually trying to achieve. And there are some things that we have to think differently about. I don't know how many years it's going to be before we have a significant maritime industrial base where we're going to get to shipbuilding at scale again. In the interim, I think the solutions they're looking at Korean and Japanese shipyards as an interim potential solution are fantastic. I mean, it's about time we've started talking about that. And the cost basis for production there is so much less. But the reality is the constituencies in our nation, particularly around Congress and and trying to, essentially make sure that we're padding industry and protecting industry, make that very difficult. So we have hard decisions to make as policymakers within our leadership chains over what do we want? Do we want it faster and cheaper because we need that capability now and we want to pay less for it? Or do we want to, try and continue to protect an industrial base that's struggling to deliver? And we cannot buy our way out of this problem with as expensive as things are anymore and as in debt as a nation we are. So again, like those are you have to pick your objective and then you have to align policy to enable the objective. I would argue that we're doing that in some cases pretty well and we're our own worst enemy in other cases. And it's really just depends on what we're trying to do and who's leading the effort.
Okay, we have. Go ahead. Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, I strongly agree with being honest about where we are leaders and where we are not, and beginning with the end in mind and backing up. I do think there's a layer of nuance here about some of the cutting edge software that is starting to creep into the government, whether that is artificial intelligence or other things. And that is that it is not just a data challenge. There's also an IP challenge, and there's also a security classification guide challenge. And what I mean by that is, if we go back to this idea that data is fuel to develop these systems and continuously improve these systems, then to the extent that the data is siloed, it just stifles innovation. And data is siloed right now. The second thing on IP, every time we interact with the government and we build AI systems, we are negotiating from scratch the software and services agreements, what we can take back and use for other things, what we cannot, who owns what, and to what extent it can be shared. And that is challenging. And the last thing on the security classification guide, which gets into the ability to transfer learn. If I have a computer vision algorithm that I'm trying to put on a drone that I've trained on millions of hours of video, and I retrain that model on one more picture, do I have to go through a multi-day or multi-week swap process to get it approved again? Because right now, in many cases, we do. When we think about iteration velocity and removing some of the barriers to just speed of iteration, those like seemingly, frankly, innocuous things like data sharing, IP, and security, how we treat security classification, are things that will either hamper or accelerate.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we need to
go
get to an
ahead.
information age solution to these things. The reality of, old paper, security classification guides and siloed data is just not okay anymore. And the reality is, hey, the good news is we have AI now. You want to see if there's something classified, have the AI go look for whatever the key thing is and identify if it's in there or not, and then make a policy judgment call on it. We've just bureaucratized this to the point where we're no longer able to move quickly on it. And the fact that we can't move quickly and the fact that it's siloed just means that cost goes up and latency in the process increases. So again, these are hard things, and what we're really having to do is retrain an entire Cold War workforce from industrial processes to information age processes. But frankly, we're going to suffer if we don't figure out how to make that happen.
Yeah. So we only have about 8 minutes left. I have a couple of things I want to try and wrap up here, but I want to pull on this again. It gets back to what do we do tomorrow? We're going to step off the berm tomorrow. Let's execute. The data thing, that could be a whole separate panel discussion. It's so important. How do we, all of us have experienced, I'm sure most of the audience out there has experienced this data issue for decades. When one organization can't talk to another often we find it's more policy driven. How do we use data to overcome that problem? We talk about digital twins, we talk about AI, so how, and we can talk at the high level, but what I want you to think about is what in the department or an industry could we do tomorrow? Who's the belly button? Where does that decision authority allow says you will do this to integrate, to break those walls down between data sharing or common databases, use, the security classification. Where does that happen? Because right now it's kind of like the supply chain, right? Who's in charge? Is it the program manager or is it the data item manager? Is it the user? Where ultimately is the trail boss that solves that problem? And again, I know that's a big question or opinion. We don't have the rest of the data sort through that. But at the end of the day, somebody has got to be, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, I'd argue that policy guidance is already out there. And the reality is we are failing to follow it. Particularly around, working at the lowest classification level possible and really, trying to make the data available, overall. And that comes back to specific programs and specific projects that get into wanting to silo their data or control their data rather than share it. And again, that is both government and industry who are guilty of that because they don't necessarily want other people looking at their data or seeing what that looks like. And so I would offer that, that those mid-tier level officers that are in program managers or whatever, or program executives, officers or PAEs are going to have to figure out what that looks like. And you just need to take charge of that. An example, when I was working with our NATO allies on sharing information, there was some push by the folks in my command at the time at NAVUR to try and make sure everything was classified. And I argued that when we were collecting raw imagery or raw sensor data, none of it was classified. It wasn't classified until we actually aggregated it and went through it. And frankly, it was advantageous to us to keep it in a dirty, unclassified network that any of our alliance partners could then tap into and pull up and find value in their arena. And again, it was a much better way of doing business than trying to move it all up to the classified environment and then very costly sort it out up there. So again, like you did, we leaders just need to actually lead on this and hold subordinates accountable on it. The policy guidance is there.
Yeah, I want to again emphasize your point there, because it's a point that I make not only with my students at Naval Postgraduate School, but with my program managers. I think most of the one of our biggest challenges is the leading part. So I agree that a lot of the authorities and policies that we keep chasing after already exist. A lot of these changes, while they're good, I mean, who argues with we want speed, but a lot of our abilities are already there. So what's lacking? And I would say it's the leadership to say we have got to change the mind's culture and the leadership to take the authorities and go execute the authorities that we're given, rather than asking for the authorities that we already have. We got 4 minutes left. I'm going to do a quick round the horn here on your last comments before we wrap up. So I'll start, Ariel, with you. If you give us about 30 seconds to sort of wrap your final thoughts up of wisdom for the 402 audience members out there.
Yeah, thanks. So I really think, as you said, if you tell your officer, take a Pathfinder project, maybe a small demonstration, maybe even in the sustainment area that is usually easier in a policy, you can take that into another level. So you can really check there the digital engineering, see that, okay, you are able to do some innovation there. That's a small win. With a small win, you change the culture with aggregating them. And I really believe that if you take them and tell your officer, take that Pathfinder project in a small scale, but get a small win in an area that is easy to win exactly in sustainment, it can build the culture of that mood. And that's what I would recommend. Okay, take it as a tip and
Great.
move forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Ariel. Chris, any last comments?
Yes, so no, everything that was said today I thought was good. This is a culture change challenge, and that's going to require leadership, right? And we're going to have to keep at this and make sure the force knows that they have permission to take risk and do things differently, right? We're going to have to protect those that do, because there will be failures, but we're going to have to lean into this and stay at it. Like I think I said in my first comments was, these are all the right things to go do in theory, and we have guidance. Now we have to keep on the system and get that middle know it's okay to change and do things differently, and promote those that do, and those that won't, then you're probably going to have to send them on their way. So anyways, no, thanks for having me, and this was good to be here. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Kyle, do you have any last comments in our minute and a half left?
Chris took it. If we abstract one level and view this through change management, incentives matter. People will act rationally according to whatever interests they see. So how can we incentivize the behavior we seek and disincentivize the behavior we're trying to change? We're in an exciting place. Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Excellent, you bet. And Admiral Mattis, final thoughts.
Yeah, this is not a technology problem. This is not an industrial-based problem. This is a risk and opportunity relationship problem. The reality is we have far too many leaders that look at the world through the eyes of risk, not understanding that they're letting opportunities slip by, and not understanding that the greater risk is not taking risk. They're actually risking long-term failure for short-term learning that needs to happen. And that is a complete cultural revolution that we need to drive in the department. It's coming from the top to do this. But we still have far too many leaders that are far too risk averse. And then even when our leaders do take risk, the frozen middle prevents the actual change from happening in a meaningful way. So I think it's incumbent upon us, if we're serious about the policy changes that the administration wants to drive, to actually drive that change throughout the organization and iterate on these things. I think there's a great start in this administration to trying to reform that, but the reality is proof's in the pudding, and we haven't seen the proof yet. So again, I would just encourage leaders to lead and be willing to take risk and seek opportunity. Otherwise, this is going to be meaningless.
Yeah, excellent comments for all around. And again, I want to emphasize, it seems like we've come full circle to it. It really does require leadership in this business. And as I tell again, my PMs and my students, most of you come with the tools you already have that are already required. The leadership tool, you need to execute that in this environment, and you'll find that good things can happen. So again, I'd like to just thank all of you for taking your time on this really important topic. It's clearly critical to the nation and to the world. And you spending this hour and a half with us here, sharing your thoughts, has been invaluable. So once again, thank you for your time, and hope to see you real soon.
Thanks.